All right, today we're tearing down our team's production evaluation of Looker versus Preset. Now, this isn't going to be your typical feature-by-feature rundown. No, this is a deep dive from a data engineering team that was this close to a full-blown migration, all thanks to some very real-world pressures.
So, what kicked this whole thing off? You probably guessed it, the BI license bill. It just kept climbing, forcing a really tough conversation. We had to ask ourselves, is there a way to slash these costs without, setting our data stack on fire? And that one financial question, well, it launched one of the deepest technical investigations our team has ever done.
And we realized something fast. This wasn't just about swapping out a UI. The big takeaway for us, our core thesis, became this. Replacing your BI tool is a semantic layer and governance decision. It's a fundamental architectural choice. It's about deciding where your business logic is going to live and, frankly, who gets to define what truth even means. Make no mistake, this is an engineering problem, through and through.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with why we even looked at this, then get into the nitty-gritty of architecture and the semantic layer. After that, we'll cover the dev workflow and the real story on cost, and then finally we'll give you our verdict.
All right, Section 1. Let's set the stage here. Why even bother looking at Preset in the first place? And more importantly, what were our absolute must-have, non-negotiable requirements for anything that was going to replace Looker?
The drivers were pretty straightforward, yeah. Cost was the spark that lit the fire, for sure. But for the engineering team, the real pull was the promise of an open-source foundation with Apache Superset. We were craving more direct SQL control, a way to iterate on dashboards faster without all the LookML ceremony, and honestly, a path to escape what felt like serious vendor lock-in.
So for our proof of concept, we had a really clear checklist. I mean, the standard stuff like SSO integration and scheduled reports. Total table stakes. But the real tests, the things that would make or break this, were two things. First, could we get a proper, Git-friendly, version-controlled dev workflow out of it? And second, and this is the big one, could it even come close to matching the trust and consistency we got from Looker's semantic layer? That last one, well, that became the central challenge of this whole evaluation.
Okay, now we're getting to the fun stuff, the engineering core, the architecture, how a query actually gets from a user's click to the data warehouse. This stuff dictates everything: performance, cost, scale. And let me tell you, this is where the philosophies of these two tools just completely fork.
So, Looker's architecture is, for all intents and purposes, a tightly integrated monolith. And at its core, you've got this really powerful LookML transpiler. What it does is take your abstract model, the one you write in code, and it generates hyper-specific, precise SQL. The query lifecycle is almost entirely synchronous. You know the drill. A user clicks, the browser spins, and a connection is held open to the warehouse. It feels super interactive, which is great, but that synchronous model has some serious consequences when you start talking about concurrency.
Preset, on the other hand, which is built on Superset, of course, is a completely different beast. It's a modern microservice-based architecture. It's a Python app that uses Celery workers to handle tasks asynchronously, so when you run a query, the web server doesn't wait around, it just hands it off to a task queue. Honestly, it's a brilliant design for dealing with long-running queries and handling high concurrency. You just don't get those dreaded browser timeouts.
And if you boil it all down, the key difference is this. Looker's state, its source of truth, is a bunch of files in a Git repository. Version control is just baked right in. Preset state lives inside a metadata database. And that shift from a file-based world to a row-based database world, it fundamentally changes everything about the developer workflow. It forces you to rethink what BI as code actually means.
That architectural difference leads us right into the main event, the semantic layer showdown. This is the heart of it all. It's where the business logic lives, where a simple word like revenue gets its one true definition. And honestly, this is where we found the most significant and, frankly, the most painful trade-offs between these two platforms.
We had a breakthrough when we stopped thinking of the semantic layer as just some feature. We started thinking of it as an API contract for the business. It's a stable, trusted interface to your data. When someone asks for revenue, the semantic layer guarantees they get the one contractually obligated definition every single time, no matter how they ask. And that guarantee is what gives you consistency.
So Looker's LookML is this incredibly rich, dependency-aware system. It lets you centralize all your business logic, your joins, calculations, aggregations, all in one place, all as code. Superset's model, by comparison, is much, much thinner. A data set is basically just a pointer to a single table or a raw SQL query. That means the logic isn't centrally managed by the tool itself. It either has to be pushed upstream into something like dbt, or And this is the scary part, it gets defined ad hoc over and over again in each individual analysis.
And that's where you run headfirst into what we started calling the metric drift problem. It's so easy to picture. Analyst A defines revenue as sum of sales. Analyst B, in another dashboard, defines it as sum of sales minus refunds. And boom, just like that, you have two conflicting definitions of revenue floating around. The business loses all trust because the numbers never match up. Without those strong central guardrails, this isn't just a risk, it's pretty much inevitable.
You know, this was maybe the biggest aha moment for us. What I didn't appreciate about LookML until I seriously tried to replace it was all the invisible work it does to enforce consistency. Yeah, we used to complain about how rigid it was, but we completely took its strict governance for granted. That safety net, you only realize how valuable it is when it's gone.
So, look, here's the bottom line. If you're relying on LookML for your governance, you absolutely cannot just swap in preset and call it a day. It is not a one-to-one replacement, period. You have to make a conscious, deliberate architectural decision to rebuild that entire governance layer somewhere else, and that somewhere else is probably going to be upstream in your stack. Okay, so this huge difference in philosophy has a massive impact on the day-to-day developer workflow. So let's talk about what it actually feels like to build in these two systems. And, maybe more importantly, who ends up owning the operational headache?
Looker really forces you to treat BI development like a software engineering discipline. You've got your personal dev mode, Git branches, pull requests, code reviews, the whole shebang. It's rigorous. Preset is all about speed and agility. It's a UI-driven workflow. You click around in the web interface, hit save, and your changes are live, instantly. Now, you can do version control, but it's this manual process of exporting YAML files and managing them yourself. It's not built in.
And this really forces a critical question about ownership, doesn't it? When you go from a highly structured platform where the vendor holds your hand to this super flexible open source-based toolkit, who's on the hook? Who's responsible for governance, for reliability, for making sure a rogue query doesn't melt your data warehouse and your budget along with it?
Yeah, the answer became crystal clear to us pretty quick. With a tool like Preset, that entire burden of ownership shifts. It moves right from the BI vendor and lands squarely on the shoulders of the data engineering team. You get all this amazing freedom and flexibility, but the price you pay is a much, much higher level of operational responsibility.
All right, let's circle back to the thing that started this whole journey, cost. But what we discovered is that the sticker price on the software license, that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the total cost of ownership.
This was a huge discovery for us. The money doesn't just disappear. Saving money on the software license is like squeezing a balloon. The cost just pops up somewhere else. In this case, that cheaper license can easily lead to way more and way less optimized queries hitting your data warehouse. So that money you saved, it often shows right back up on your warehouse compute bill.
So this leads to a really important question. When is choosing a tool like Preset actually going to hurt you? Because all that flexibility can become a massive liability if you're not ready for it. It'll hurt if your manual governance processes aren't rock solid, leading to that metric chaos we talked about. It'll hurt when your team isn't equipped for performance tuning and unoptimized queries start hammering your warehouse. And it will definitely hurt when your non-technical users who don't have the safety of LookML's guardrails anymore accidentally run a query that costs you a fortune.
So, for any of you out there using a warehouse like Redshift with its tighter concurrency limits, here's a super practical checklist for how to avoid melting it with Superset. You've got to be aggressive with caching using something like Redis. You should probably set up cache warm-ups with Airflow for your critical dashboards. You need to tune your worker concurrency, and most importantly, pre-aggregate your data with dbt or materialized views before it ever gets to Superset. These aren't just nice-to-haves, people. For a production setup, these are absolutely essential, non-negotiable.
Okay, let's bring this all together and land the plane. What are the cold, hard realities of trying to migrate from Looker to Preset? And how can you actually make the right call for your team, for your company?
First off, let's be brutally honest. A migration is way, way harder than it looks on paper. This is not a port. It is a full-scale, ground-up rewrite of your entire semantic layer. Every single piece of LookML logic, every persistent-derived table you rely on has to be manually recreated in SQL. Your complex permissions and row-level security models got to be completely redesigned. And you lose that amazing safety net of the LookML content validator, the thing that stops you from accidentally breaking half the company's dashboards.
But look, after all that, I want to be clear.
Preset is absolutely the right answer in some situations. If that BI license cost is a primary hard blocker, it's a great choice. If you're an engineering-driven org with a really strong, SQL-heavy culture, it's a natural fit. If your team is genuinely comfortable owning the BI governance and the infrastructure, go for it. And it's especially compelling if your team has already gone all in on dbt as your primary semantic layer anyway.
So, after going back and forth, we managed to boil everything down to this pretty simple decision framework. If you can answer these 4 questions honestly, I think it'll point you to the right platform. First, how complex are your metrics? Do you need things like symmetric aggregates for complex joins? If so, you're probably leaning Looker. Second, what's your transformation philosophy? Is dbt already your single source of truth? If yes, Preset makes a ton of sense. Third, budget. Is a $50,000 plus a year license a total non-starter? If so, the choice is pretty much made for you. And finally, who's your user base? Is your main goal to provide governed self-service for non-technical users? Then you're probably better off with Looker.
So here are the 5 big engineering takeaways we walked away with. Number 1, the semantic layer is an architectural choice, not just another feature. Number 2, freedom requires discipline. That flexibility demands really robust processes. 3, a BI migration is a rewrite, not a port. Say it with me. 4, license savings will become warehouse spend if you're not careful. And finally, number 5, think of Looker as an integrated analytics platform and Preset as a really powerful visualization toolkit that's part of a composable stack.
And that really leaves us with one final big question. Because this whole thing, it isn't just about Looker versus Preset. It's about 2 fundamentally different philosophies for the future of the data stack. Do you go for the tightly integrated governed platform where a lot of the hard stuff is handled for you? Or do you opt for the flexible, composable stack, where your team owns the glue that holds it all together? There's no single right answer. It really just depends on the DNA of your team. Thanks for joining this explainer.